A prophetic vocation demands of us allegiance to integrity of vision and belief in the face of those who would either seek to silence or discredit our words, and ready to hold up an alternative vision, one that enables people to imagine new possibilities. Geographies of the heart. All my life, I have searched for a place of belonging, a place that would become home. Growing up in a small town, I knew in early childhood what home was, what it felt like. Home was the safe place, the place where one could count on not being hurt. It was the place where wounds were attended to. The house was fixed, unchanging, and the natural landscape adamantly growing. In this wilderness where I first moved and lived and had my being, I was nature and nature was me.
But I don't want to limit it to just an immigrant story or a film about refugees. You know, to me it was a film about so many different things. You know, if you want to talk about just from the time I gave him the footage to now, the amount of poor people in the world is like expanded by billions, you know. And even if it's just a journey about economics, or if it's a journey about saying no to the establishment, or it's a journey about race or gender or ethnicity, you know, there's so many other things you can discuss. So I didn't want to like reduce it to the immigrant story, because within it is also the fact that I'm just trying to be a creative the whole time, and you know, to be accepted as a creative person with just normal ideas.
With my students, I talk about 3 spaces. The first space I think about as our embodied space. So like, you know, your body, obviously, but not just your body, but where your feels, as the structure of your feeling. Where do you feel what you feel? How do you know? How do you feel what you feel? That's the first space. Okay, and then the second space is institutions, how we project that out. So institutions meaning rules and organizations, like an institution of like marriage, and an institution like the phrase I do. When you say I do, you make something happen, right? So it's a kind of institution, it's a rule. And then the third space is politics. What is carnally created when you mix the first and 2 spaces. The way that I think about the problem of the traditional environmental movement, it does not theorize or envision the relationship or even the existence of these 3 spaces. And how I've come to these 3 spaces is really struggling to understand the work on the ground through a lens of love. When you look at it as material struggle, trench rituals of belonging and dreaming, the construction of collective freedoms through mutual trauma healing in our haunted places, right? When you think about love in those terms, then these spaces, these first, second, and third spaces seem really critical to our understanding of environmental justice.
And so what else is he doing here if it's not community building or community development? Because he's quite explicit about it not being that. And he talks about wanting to create place. He talks about wanting to create ecstatic moments, right? What a beautiful concept, and that he really does quite beautifully. And he talks about just wanting to be a good neighbor. And he wanted to have a place where he could invite other people that he liked to hang out, and where people would maybe like to hang out, just because he wanted to look at it. He wanted to look at something nicer. And what this opens up, this idea of being a good neighbor. How can we think about being together or being with each other if we're not making up for the lacks or the kind of, you know, violent cultural dispossessions and economic and monetary dispossession? Well, you know, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, they talk about fugitive publics, which is about being together in bad debt, right? Not paying back your debts or not expecting that somebody else is paying back your debts, because actually it's impossible to pay back debts. And rather than thinking, okay, how can we pay back that bad debt? Or how can I give back to my community? Or how can I expect that somebody's going to pay back the impossible debts? What about living in that bad debt? What about staying in one place? What about not leaving? What about being a good neighbor? That means not building something, but instead being open to something, or opening to something, right? That is about kind of radical hospitality, a hospitality to what may come, the thing that may come. And I think that this is not a community that the Astor's work is building, but a kind of, but a good neighborliness, an opening to what may come that isn't necessarily community, it's not necessarily something recognizable. It's an opening. So I think that what I sort of want to sit with, or get us to sit with, is the thought of having an opening to bad debt rather than credit, rather than giving back, rather than building. Just a kind of opening that I think the Astor's work does really, really quite beautifully.